What happened in the House of Representatives yesterday will go down as one of the most stunning moments in modern political history. Speaker Mike Johnson believed he had control. He thought he could embarrass freshman Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett in front of the whole chamber. What he didn't expect was the ice-cold response that would leave him without words and change the entire dynamic of American politics. If you want to see exactly how apolitical newcomer just schooled the most powerful man in the House, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, because this story is about to get wild. And trust me, you've never seen anything like what Jasmine Crockett pulled off. Picture this. The House chamber is crowded. Every seat filled, C-SPAN cameras rolling. The tension is so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mike Johnson, the third most powerful person in Washington, is standing at the speaker's podium with that familiar grin on his face. He's about to make what he thinks will be a career-ending move against Jasmine Crockett. But Jasmine Crockett, she's sitting there remarkably calm. Not a single emotion showing on her face. The cameras zoom in on her and you can see it in her eyes. She knows something that nobody else in that room knows. Something that's about to turn this entire confrontation upside down. Johnson raises his gavel. The chamber falls silent. He opens his mouth to deliver what he thinks will be the final blow. And that's when everything changes, because what happened next didn't just embarrass Mike Johnson. It exposed him in a way that nobody saw coming. To understand why this moment was so explosive, you need to know who these two people really are. Mike Johnson isn't just any politician. He's the Speaker of the House, the most powerful Republican in America after Donald Trump. This is a man who controls what bills get voted on, what investigations happen, and basically the entire legislative agenda of the country. Johnson got to this position by being strategic, composed and determined when he needs to be. He's the guy who survived the turmoil when Kevin McCarthy got ousted. He's the one who managed to unite a divided Republican Party. And he did it all with a smile, and that southern charm that makes you forget just how dangerous he can be in a political battle. But here's what makes Johnson really formidable. He's underestimated by almost everyone. While other politicians are busy making headlines and Twitter feuds, Johnson is steadily operating behind the scenes, forming alliances, making deals, and accumulating power. He's the ultimate political chess player. On the other side, you have Jasmine Crockett. Now, if you don't know who she is, you're abouto. Crockett is a freshman congresswoman from Texas who came to Washington with a reputation as a fierce trial lawyer. Before politics, she was a civil rights attorney who took on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. She's the kind of person who built her career by walking into rooms where she was the only black woman, and still managed to win. But here's what the Washington establishment didn't understand about Jasmine Crockett. She didn't come to Congress to play nice. She came to fight. And unlike a lot of politicians who talk tough but fold under pressure, Crockett has actually been in real battles. She's faced down hostile judges, aggressive opposing counsel, and courtrooms full of people who wanted to see her fail. The stakes of this confrontation go way beyond these two individuals. This is about power, respect, and the future direction of American politics. Johnson represents the old guard, the established way of doing things where seniority matters, where newcomers are supposed to sit down and shut up, where the speaker's word is law. Crockett represents something completely different. She's part of a new generation of politicians who refuse to be intimidated by titles or traditions. She's fighting for people who have been ignored by Washington for decades, and she's not about to let anyone, not even the Speaker of the House, silence her voice. This confrontation had been building for months. Ever since Crockett arrived in Congress, she'd been asking uncomfortable questions, pushing for investigations that the Republican leadership didn't want, and generally making herself a thorn in their side. Johnson and his allies thought they had found the perfect opportunity to put her in her place once and for all. They were about to learn they had seriously miscalculated. The whole thing started during what should have been a routine committee hearing. Johnson was presiding over a debate about ethics violations in Congress. Ironic considering what was about to happen. Crockett had been asking pointed questions about campaign finance irregularities, and you could see Johnson getting more and more frustrated with each question. Now here's where it gets interesting. Crockett wasn't just asking random questions. She had been doing her homework. For weeks, she'd been quietly gathering information, following paper trails and building a case. But nobody in the Republican leadership knew just how deep she'd dug. As the hearing progressed, Crockett started presenting documents. At first, they seemed routine. Standard campaign finance reports, donor lists, nothing that would raise eyebrows. But she was building something. Each document was a piece of a larger puzzle, and she was laying them out one by one. You could see Johnson getting uncomfortable. He started interrupting her more frequently, claiming she was taking too much time, that her questions weren't relevant. But Crockett didn't back down. She calmly responded to each interruption, stayed focused on her line of questioning, and kept presenting her evidence. That's when Johnson made his first mistake. Instead of letting her finish and moving on, he decided to try to humiliate her. He started making snide comments about freshmen, Congresspeople who don't understand how things work around here. He questioned whether she had the experience to be asking such complex questions. The other Republicans in the room started laughing. You could see them thinking this was going to be easy. Just another newcomer getting put in their place by the experienced speaker. Some of them started making their own comments, piling on what they thought was going to be an easy target. But Crockett, she just sat there stone-faced, letting them have their moment. She didn't get angry. She didn't raise her voice. She just waited. And if you were watching closely, you could see the slightest hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth, because she knew what was coming next. Johnson, emboldened by the laughter from his colleagues, decided to go for the kill shot. He started talking about how some people come to Congress thinking they can change everything overnight, how they don't respect the institution, how they grandstand for the cameras instead of doing the real work. Representative Crockett, he said with that condescending tone that politicians use when they think they have you cornered. Perhaps if you spent less time on social media and more time actually reading the bills, you'd understand how things really work here. The chamber erupted in laughter. Republicans were slapping their desks. Even some of the staff members were trying to hide their grins. Johnson was clearly enjoying himself, basking in what he thought was his moment of triumph, and that's when Jasmine Crockett slowly stood up. The laughter died down as Crockett rose from her seat. There was something about the way she moved, calm, deliberate, confident, that made everyone pay attention. She walked to the microphone and the chamber fell completely silent. You could literally hear a pin drop. "Mystica," she said, her voice crystal clear and carrying perfectly through the chamber. "I appreciate your advice about reading bills. I really do, because I've been doing a lot of reading lately." Johnson was still smiling at this point, thinking she was about to make some weak comeback that he could easily deflect. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Crockett reached into her folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "In fact," she continued, "I've been reading some very interesting documents. For instance, this campaign finance report from your 2022 election." Now Johnson's smile started to fade just a little, but enough that the cameras caught it. "You see, Mr. Speaker, when you talk about reading bills and understanding how things work, I think it's important that we all understand how campaign finance works, particularly when it comes to something called bundling." She held up the paper. "Are you familiar with bundling, Mr. Speaker?" Johnson's face went pale. The other Republicans stopped laughing because if you know anything about campaign finance law, you know that bundling is where a lot of politicians get into serious trouble. It's how you can take what looks like legal campaign contributions and turn them into something much more questionable. "I'm sure you are familiar with it," Crockett continued, "because according to this report, your campaign received over $23,000 in bundled contributions from some very interesting sources." She pulled out another document like this energy company that was lobbying against the climate bill you claim to oppose on principle. Turns out they gave you $400,000 through various bundled contribution. The chamber was dead silent now. You could see Johnson trying to figure out how to respond, but Crockett wasn't finished. Or this defense contractor that somehow knew you were going to support their weapons procurement bill before it was even introduced publicly. They managed to bundle together $650,000 for your campaign. Quite a coincidence, wouldn't you say? Another document. And then there's this pharmaceutical company that was facing investigation by the House Ethics Committee, the same committee that you, as Speaker, have significant influence over. They bundled $300,000 for your re-election campaign, just 2 weeks before that investigation was quietly dropped. By now, Johnson looked like he'd seen a ghost. The color had completely drained from his face. The other Republicans in the chamber were starting to realize that this wasn't some newcomer congresswoman making wild accusations. This was a trained attorney presenting evidence in a methodical, powerful manner. But Crockett wasn't done. She pulled out one more document, and this one was different. You could tell by the way she held it that this was the big one. "Mr. Speaker, you talked about understanding how things really work here. Well, I think the American people deserve to understand how this works." She held up the final document. This is an email chain between your chief of staff and a lobbyist for the oil industry. Would you like me to read it out loud? Johnson finally found his voice. This is highly inappropriate, he started to say, but Crockett cut him off. What's inappropriate, Mr. Speaker, is selling your vote to the highest bidder, and then having the nerve to lecture me about how Congress works. The chamber erupted. Democrats were on their feet applauding. Republicans were shouting objections. Johnson was banging his gavel, trying to restore order, but you could see the panic in his eyes. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett stood there calm as ice, waiting for the turmoil to die down so she could deliver the final blow. When the chamber finally quieted down, Crockett delivered her final blow. Mr. Speaker, she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife, you asked me to spend more time reading bills. I have a better suggestion. Why don't you spend more time reading the Constitution, particularly the part about public dishonesty and the duty of elected officials to serve the people, not special interests? She gathered her documents calmly. I'll be referring these materials to the House Ethics Committee and the Department of Justice, because unlike some people in this chamber, I actually believe in accountability. And then she delivered the line that's now being quoted everywhere. You wanted to know how things really work around here, Mr. Speaker? Well, now you're about to find out. With that, she sat down. Johnson tried to regain control of the chamber, but the damage was done. The cameras had captured everything. The documents were already being leaked to reporters. Within hours, every major news network was covering the story. The immediate fallout was swift and brutal. Johnson's office went into full damage control mode, releasing statements about baseless accusations and political theater. But the evidence was too strong. The documents were real. The financial connections were clear. And more importantly, other media outlets started digging deeper. Within 24 hours, the Wall Street Journal had confirmed the energy company connections. The Washington Post had verified the defense contractor payments. CNN had obtained additional emails that corroborated Crockett's claims. This wasn't just one congresswoman making accusations anymore. This was a full-blown scandal. But the real impact goes far beyond just Mike Johnson. What Jasmine Crockett did that day sent a message to every corrupt politician in Washington. The new generation isn't playing by the old rules. They're not going to be intimidated by titles or seniority. They're not going to sit quietly while special interests buy and sell influence. The response from voters has been overwhelming. Crockett's social media following has exploded. She's getting endorsements from progressive groups across the country. More importantly, she's inspiring other young politicians to stand up and fight back against dishonesty. Meanwhile, Johnson is facing the biggest crisis of his political career. There are already calls for his resignation from both Democrats and some Republicans. The ethics investigation that Crockett triggered is expanding. And most damaging of all, his reputation as an expert political tactician has been totally destroyed. Think about it. This is a man who was supposed to be one of the smartest political minds in Washington. He survived the turmoil of the McCarthy ouster. He united a fractured Republican Party. He was being talked about as a potential future presidential candidate, and he was just completely outmaneuvered by a freshman congresswoman who did nothing more than her homework and refused to be intimidated. And it was that moment she saw the world's tiniest. The broader implications for American politics are huge. For too long, the Washington establishment has operated on the assumption that they could control the narrative, that they could silence critics through intimidation, that their power was unassailable. What Jasmine Crockett proved is that in the age of transparency, accountability, and social media, that old playbook doesn't work anymore. You can't just rely on backroom deals and special interest money. You can't assume that your critics don't have the resources or the skills to fight back. But here's what's really exciting about this moment. It's just the beginning. Crockett has already hinted that Johnson isn't the only one she's been investigating. The documents she presented were just the tip of the iceberg. She's been building cases against multiple members of Congress, both Republican and Democrat. This isn't about party politics, she said in an interview after the confrontation. This is about cleaning up a system that's been broken for decades. And if you're corrupt regardless of what party you're from, you should be worried right now. So what happens next? Well, the immediate focus is on Johnson and whether he can survive the ethics investigation. But the bigger question is whether this marks a turning point in American politics. Are we finally reaching a moment where dishonesty has real consequences? Where young principled politicians can actually take on the establishment and win? Based on what we've seen from Jasmine Crockett, I'd say the answer is yes. She's shown that you don't need to be in Washington for decades to have real power. You just need to be smart, prepared, and fearless. And if you're Mike Johnson right now, you're probably wishing you'd never tried to laugh at Jasmine Crockett because her icy response didn't just freeze the chamber. It might have just frozen his entire political career. What do you think about all this? Did Jasmine Crockett go too far? Or was this exactly the kind of accountability we need in Washington? And more importantly, who do you think she's going after next? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to stay updated on this developing story and see more political bombshells like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell because, trust me, if Jasmine Crockett is just getting started, you're not going to want to miss what comes next. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video where we break down exactly what documents Crockett has on the other members of Congress she's investigating. It's going to be explosive.